Second part of the future of TESOL, in response to the question, do we still need native English speaker teachers, I'm going to talk about the rise of ELF, English as a lingua franca. Do you speak ELF? So I'm continuing with the second reason for the demise of the NES, the native English speaker teacher. In the first part, I talked about losing brand exclusivity, and now I'm going to talk about ELF. And in the third part, I'm going to talk about call and the digitized conversation partner. So here's a definition of ELF. ELF is a contact language between persons who share neither a common native tongue nor a common national culture, and for whom English is the chosen foreign language of communication. What we know is that there are more non-native speakers of English than native speakers. And for the most part, these non-native speakers are going to be the ones who are going to be the ELF speakers when they come into contact with each other. And so, because of this vast number of non-native English speakers, we can say that English is being shaped just as much by its non-native speakers as its native speakers. Just to give you an example of ELF and where it's spoken and by whom, think of any international context where a lingua franca facilitates communication. If you think of something like an event like the Beijing Olympics, that probably was an enormous meeting of ELF speakers, Koreans talking to Chinese officials or people in the information booths would communicate in English. So it was a huge display of ELF, English as a lingua franca. And so anywhere we have these kind of international meetings, through travel, through business, we're going to find ELF is spoken. What we have to know is that ELF is different from native English varieties in the sense that intelligibility is privileged over accuracy and appropriateness. Now, our English language native speaker teachers probably spend a lot of time working on the particular consonant cluster, the particular sound, the TH sound in thanks and then. What we know is that often, and even in English varieties, certain dialects, that particular sound, which is very difficult to master, is simplified. From thanks, we can change it to tanks, which makes it a lot easier. And then we can change to den. Is there a problem here in understanding what I'm referring to? I don't think so. But, of course, in terms of appropriateness, it's certainly not native English speaking. It is, of course, English as a lingua franca. Here's some more examples. For example, in terms of grammar, that dreaded third person S. Who cares about the third person S? It has no function. The only function it has is in a sociolinguistic sense of marking who is a native speaker and who isn't. Well, if we're talking to other non-native speakers, and we're a non-native speakers, we can agree together that, hey, let's get rid of the third person S. Why do we need it? Double negatives in English, of course, are frowned upon, whereas in most other languages, you can use a double negative. So why not in English as a lingua franca? I don't know if they would say we ain't got no education, but certainly the I don't know nothing would be perfectly acceptable in ELF. We're also going to have differences in pragmatics. They're going to be different facework norms. For example, the kinds of redundancy we use when we want to be polite, the number of hedges, they're probably going to be non-existent in ELF, because we both recognize that we are not bearers of a particular culture through our being an ELF speaker. So let's cut to the chase and be pretty direct and forget about all the hedges. English as a lingua franca can be understood in relationship to what I'll call EIL, or English as an International Language. If we look at this particular diagram, it's working on Katcher's distinction between World Englishes, between inner and outer World Englishes, and the expanding circle of World Englishes. Let's look at the top here. Inner circle countries are Britain, United States, Australia, Canada. And outer countries are countries where English is not exclusively spoken. It may be spoken along with many other languages, such as India, Nigeria, Philippines. English as an international language then can be characterized as being the kind of English that results from speakers in the inner and outer circle English, World Englishes, communicating with usually with non-native speakers, or they could be communicating with each other. So if you take a Brit communicating with somebody from Nigeria, they both can be considered L1 speakers, but what results is a kind of international language. World Englishes, on the other English as a lingua franca, on the other hand, tends to be the kind of communication that takes place with between countries in the expanding area of English. So somebody from China communicating with somebody from Brazil would use English as a lingua franca. So now we have L2 to L2. It's interesting, especially when we think of ourselves as native English speaker teachers, that we may be a hindrance to the development of ELF. And especially if you think of that in terms of comparing ELF with a previous very successful lingua franca, and that is Latin. And Latin flourished exactly with the demise of its native speakers. And what we know, in a sense, is that, especially with ELF speakers, non-native speakers, can be really intimidated by native English speakers. How can they ever pronounce the th in then, and the th in these, and the th in thanks, when they don't have to? Very few native speakers belong to the community of practice of English as a lingua franca. So being a native English speaker teacher is perhaps no help in the teaching, probably a hindrance in the teaching of ELF. And also we can note, as we've noted before, that ELF is free of the cultural hegemony of native speaker varieties. We have prestige dialects of English, of course, in different countries, and those tend to be the standard by which all others are judged. Well, ELF speakers have nothing to judge them by, because they're not adhering to any of those kinds of norms. Okay, so when it comes down to it, we got to a situation where the elves are in and the nests are out. So just as the majority of Latin as lingua franca teachers were non-native, so are the majority of ELF teachers. And the greatest market for ELF speakers is likely to be Asia. Okay, that is going to be the kind of lingua franca that's developed perhaps the most in that part of the world. So when it comes down to it, if we talk about the native English speaker teacher, as I made this analogy before, a native English speaker teacher is like Russian vodka. It's good and it's special, but it's not the only vodka out there. A non-native English as a lingua franca speaker teacher is something like Grey Goose vodka. It's French, but man, is it good. And maybe I shouldn't say non-native English as a lingua franca speaker teacher. It's quite a mouthful anyway, because in a sense, it's not non-native, it's native. The people who speak ELF are native English as a lingua franca speakers. And if they teach it, then they are NELFSTs. Okay, so in many ways, when we talk about the demise of the native English speaker teacher, part of the demise is because they do not have the skills to teach the kind of English which is already and is going to be more and more in demand in the future.